Welcome, everyone, to Secret Sauce, the show where we hear real-time insights from industry leaders. I'm Karly Iacono. Today, I am so pleased to be joined by Josh Sewald, the principal at Dynamic Engineering. Josh, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning, Karly. How's everything going this morning?
Life is good. No complaints over here. Getting ready for the holidays and business is crazy. So all good. Hope the
That's
same for
great.
you.
Same here. Yep, getting ready for the holidays.
Wonderful. So today we are going to be talking about kind of the state of build-to-suit construction and what that looks like given all the changes we've had in the last few years. But before we jump into today's topic, why don't we take a moment to hear a little bit about you and your role at Dynamic Engineering?
Certainly. And again, good morning. Welcome. Really happy to be here this morning. Overall, Dynamic Engineering, we are a land development consulting firm. We specialize in assisting various different real estate developers as well as real estate professionals. Our goal is to take someone and to assist the retailer like yourself, the broker, look at a piece of property and advise what we can do on the parcel and go from conceptual, help out in the LOI and the work letter phase, get you through all the way through entitlements and get into, of course, construction and rent commencement. Dynamic, we're about 350 people through 13 offices spread out to the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Texas, and Florida. And this is what we do. We specialize in taking that retail dream of a property and getting it into construction.
And I will add that you are very good at it because I have had countless times where you've said, here's this raw piece of land. Josh, help. What are we going to do with this? Where do we go from here? So great at your job. I will vouch for that.
Thank you, Karly.
So let's kind of dive into what's changing in build-to-suit development. Can you give us an idea of some of the tenants that you've done work from and then maybe what their prototypes look like from a few years ago to now, and if there's been any shifts?
There's certainly shifts. As you know, Karly, the retail industry is always changing a little bit. So what I'd like to first focus on is actually a niche retailer, kind of like that hobby farmer. Tractor Supply company has really blown up in my company. 5-6 years ago, we were only doing a couple, and now they are a very robust client of ours. And their building has certainly gotten bigger. The products that they provide are certainly larger. If you've been to any of their sites, you'll see that their building is about 20,000 square feet. Their outdoor display area now has garden centers. They truly are increasing their services and their products. So their site plans and buildings are getting bigger. And in contrast to that, Karly, you'll see that a lot of the QSRs, the quick service restaurants, they're actually getting smaller on the footprint, but increasing their drive-through capacity. So really it depends on which prototype and tenant we're talking about. But the niche hobby farmer Tractor Supply store is definitely getting bigger, needs more land, more parking, whereas maybe those QSRs and the buildings are getting smaller, but they still need a little bit of configuration for more drive-through on the property.
And we did not talk about this before for anyone listening, but I am so happy you brought up Tractor Supply because I just happen to have a portfolio for sale. And they are my favorite tenant in the market right now in the single tenant net lease space. So absolutely love their business plan, love their store prototypes, and of course their credit is phenomenal. So thank you for that unplanned softball. We are obviously both huge fans of Tractor Supply. So glad to hear that's been a big part of your business as well.
Certainly. And then another prototype I'd like to just say that has been getting a little bit larger too is the gas station convenience store sector. Wawa's are now over 6,000 square feet. The layout is almost the same, pumps up front, store in the back, but that building is still getting bigger. And it's because of the new food and product lines that they're providing. So the site plans and the properties that they're looking at are getting a little bit bigger as well.
So they're actually adding a fast food component in the convenience store layout, right?
There are some of those. I would say the majority are still just traditional C-store with the gas station up front, but they are testing and piloting out those drive-through components. Some of their competitors, for example, Sheetz has already done that, but Wawa is looking at certain markets with them.
And from a land perspective, how much more square footage do you need to accommodate these larger buildings? Were we at 2 acres before and now we're at 2.5 or 2 to 1.5? What's that look like?
Very good question. It's a little challenging to answer, but I'll try to dial it in with this secret sauce. The ground up raw development, like you just mentioned, Karly, that's where we need more land, because all the new regulations and the zoning that's in place will require to have more room for stormwater management and grading. If we have a redevelopment property, though, right, a big area of asphalt pavement, maybe in front of an old Class B style shopping center, we can keep that property area much smaller for developers and for tenants coming on. So I would say if it is true raw land, no utilities, ground up, you are pushing that acreage to the 2.5, maybe even 3 acres. But if it's existing pavement and the utilities are on site and there's a lot of infrastructure around the area, we can shrink that up a little bit to 1.5 acres to 2 acres. So it really depends on the type of redevelopment that we have here.
That's a really interesting distinction, that some of these classifications are sort of grandfathered in. So you mentioned pavement and utilities. Is that all it takes to have different requirements than raw land? Does it need an existing building or structure to have different requirements, or just pavement and utilities?
Pavement utilities are certainly helpful for the redevelopment. We get credit from a stormwater standpoint to keep the amount of development to a minimum. Specifically in New Jersey, we're talking about right now, they actually promote and incentivize developers through the regulations to redevelop a lot of existing properties. So if the site is 100% paved, you can redevelop it with limited stormwater management. And if it is, say, a parking lot area in front of an existing shopping center, we know the shopping center is already serviced with utilities. So it's a little bit easier to connect those new buildings and pads that are out front along the roadway.
And because of that bonus, let's call it, have you seen more redevelopment than raw land development in the last few years?
Great question. I will say that in certain markets, there is certainly more redevelopment work. I also think the development of raw land is challenging right now in today's current financial markets because of the cost of everything. So you get some of those credits, like you mentioned, Karly, with limited stormwater management, utilities already being on the property. So I would say buyers and developers are certainly interested in development work. But as you know, that comes with other challenges, lease lines, making sure that the current shopping center doesn't have any exclusions in their lease with the new tenant that's coming in. But I will say definitely in certain markets, people are gearing towards that redevelopment because of the financial markets, that construction costs are still pretty expensive. I will, however, say, though, that more than 50% of my workload is still looking at raw land as we continue to expand in underutilized and underserviced markets with those core corporate clients like Tractor Supply, Wawa, and a lot of the QSRs. They're definitely still looking towards raw land acquisitions.
Interesting. And that's probably because you're going into markets where there is raw land, right? So it's maybe
That's
cheaper
correct.
than finding a redevelopment. And like you said, it's very market specific as which way makes the most sense.
Correct.
Talk to me for a second on parking. Have you seen any shifts to parking ratios, and how are you laying out plans differently, if at all, to accommodate parking?
Yeah, so we're always balancing two things. We're balancing what does our tenant want, of course, most important, operation that they know better than anyone. But then the second, of course, is regulations and zoning. So on the first hand, we are seeing a drop in parking. All the stores we just mentioned, Tractor Supply is 20,000 square feet. They have a 20,000 square foot fenced outdoor display area. That's almost an acre of area of product. And they really don't want more than 75, 85 parking spaces. Aldi grocery stores, who have been on a massive expansion plan the past 5 years, they too only need 85 to 95 spaces. But then you go to the right hand and you start reviewing the zoning ordinances, and those two uses may require 100 to 150 parking spaces. So you really need to know some of the local knowledge and the town that you're going in for, because it is a benefit to have less parking on site, less impervious coverage, less land area for development. It's overall more environmentally friendly to leave that portion of the property undeveloped. But certain towns are really concerned that being underparked may have a negative impact on the localized roadways and streets. So having the right professional team, and of course, that tenant operation in there with your testimony will have a higher likelihood of chance of approval with the zoning reduction of parking spaces. So I would say, in my opinion, that most retail users are dropping their parking, providing more and other alternative measures such as larger drive-through lanes, dual drive-through lanes, customer pickup windows, which really weren't in place 4 or 5 years ago. Definitely parking is being reduced at this time.
And how often would you say, when you go before a town and say, okay, here's our concept plan, is there some element of it that requires a variance? Maybe it's you want less parking, maybe it's the ratio is a little off. Is that more the norm or is that the exception?
Great question. Almost every single project I have has some type of variance on it.
Yeah.
Again, I know we're talking to a wide audience right now, but every state has local ordinances. Every town and county has their own jurisdiction. And there's no way that jurisdiction could have contemplated every single tenant that may have been thought about on this property, let alone the differences over the market changes. For example, Chipotle. 5 years ago, they were just an inline tenant space, really never were before any land use boards, because a developer would build a shopping center. And then once it was fully built and constructed, retailers would bring in Chipotle, they would become a tenant, and they would just go to the building department for internal TI improvements. Fast forward now, they're a pad. And not only are they a pad, they now want a pickup window. And towns are new to this thought process. They're used to seeing drive-thrus with menu boards and stacking studies like at a Dunkin' or a Taco Bell. But Chipotle with this pickup menu, they really need to dig on it. So to answer your initial question, I would say that the majority of my projects have variances. And that's what we spent most of our nights doing, is going to these land use boards and obtaining variances for either the use or bulk standards, particularly signage. We are, I would say, 80 to 90% of the projects that cross my desk have some type of variance associated with it.
And I guess that really does make sense if you think about how quickly these formats are changing, right? There's no way, like you just mentioned, that the towns can come up with regulations for every scenario, because some of these prototypes we're just seeing for the first time in the last few years. So
Exactly.
that's a great point. And how often, we're kind of going off script here, but how often would you say towns redo their zoning regulations? Is this once every, 10 years normally, once every 20, every 5? What does that look like?
Great question. I would say they are required, for example, in New Jersey, to look at their master plan once a decade. And as you
Okay.
know, Karly, our world moves a lot faster than that kind of a speed.
Right.
And as towns, say, grow in population and traffic patterns change, that's when the council and the jurisdictional board, they get a little bit more unique, and they'll start changing some properties or corridors. I don't believe that they look at their entire municipal zoning and master plan that often. I think it's more reactionary as their population increases in the municipality. Maybe a corridor is very heavy now on retail and drive-through, so they're looking at traffic patterns. That they do much more frequently. But I would say in general, they do not move as quickly as maybe some of the changes in the retail market, which is why we spend most of our nights at land use boards trying to get either variances or site-specific customizations done into construction.
It's got to be a huge education component to your job when dealing with all these different municipalities and these new concept plans. I can't imagine the amount of time you spend in these meetings educating the board members on what retail looks like today and how they need to adapt. It's going to be a lot of work.
We study engineering in school for 4 years. You come out of school, you take multiple exams to get your license. You spend the first 10 years of your career learning how to design a site. And then as you continue to transition into more client management, working with professionals like you, Karly, by the time I get to the board, we're not really talking always about the intimate technical details of engineering. We're talking about, is this site going to function well? Is it safe for the property and all the neighbors around it? You end up talking more like a real estate consultant necessarily than an actual technical civil engineer.
And that's how things actually get done, because you need that element, right, to bridge the gap between the towns who don't understand it and the engineers who have it all drawn out perfectly. So very important piece. What do your conversations with Department of Transportation look like these days? I know this is state specific. Some states are much easier to deal with than others, but has traffic and access become more or less of an issue in the last few years?
It's definitely picking up. One of the items about DOTs, and I think this is uniform, I don't know of a DOT who moves very, very quick. I would say most DOTs are understaffed still in 2023, and the amount of applications they have are very high. Every time, Karly, we have a new driveway, the DOT gets involved. Even if there's an existing driveway, but you're changing the trip generation or how much traffic is coming out of that particular driveway, we have to go get a DOT permit. So we are constantly working with the DOT. And I would say that the fastest a permit you can get with them right now is about 8 to 9 months. And sometimes it can get all the way up to 2 years with signal improvements, maybe decel and XL lanes. It definitely takes some time. I would say it really depends on the use. We love, right, the Wawa example. We know it generates a lot of traffic, but we call that pass-by traffic. So we have worked with the DOTs to show them that even though there's a lot of movement in and out of the driveway, that actually there is grabbing a lot of the volume that's already on the street. Whereas maybe an Aldi, for example, is more of a destination, right? You're most of the time you're not driving on the road going, let me go food shopping right now and
Right.
you know, buy all my product for the week. Usually you're driving, you're like, my E-light just went on the car. Maybe I'll fill up the gas tank and I'll get a snack. So that difference of destination trips and then pass by trips really changes the type of permit that you have to get.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned the timelines for DOT. What do the overall timelines for development look like? And I know there are so many variables. This is hard to answer. State specific, concept specific. Are we starting from scratch? Are we not? But if a new developer, because we have a lot of clients who say, I have this site, I want to redevelop it, or I have land, where do I start? Just from a high level, what is shovel in the ground, maybe, or let's start before shovel in the ground. Let's start with concept to doors open. What does the normal development timeline look like?
So if we're truly talking about ground up development, and it could be either raw land or redevelopment work, I need to just advise everyone, it's not any faster than 9 months. And that's when the stars align. I would say on average, it's about 12 months. As it becomes more complicated, you know, Karly, if you and I are doing 3 pads next to each other, you may hit that 18, 24 mark. But if we are talking single tenant pad, any type of use, I would estimate about 12 months, regardless if we are in various different states. Do we have DOT or DEP? At this point in the game in 2023, heading towards 24, there's always a half a dozen agencies that have a review of our project. And because of that coordination, it's safe to always bet about 12 months on average from conceptual plan to your first shovel on the ground. But as it gets bigger, more pads, more coordination, you could easily get to that 18 to 24 month mark. If anyone is telling a broker that you can turn it around in 3 months, then reevaluate the overall process, because if it's a TI improvement, a building permit, maybe that's doable. We can avoid the whole entitlement process and we could just work with an architect. But any type of single tenant development is a 9 months minimum, 12 on average.
That's such good information, because I think time right now, given the instability of economic conditions, is the biggest risk factor, and very hard to project where exit pricing will be 2 years out in some cases, right? And we're saying 12 months is if the stars align. And I've been doing this business long enough to know that normally the stars do not align perfectly with development, right? You hope the project goes smooth, but there's always something that pops up. So really being mindful of the time frame and the variability in market conditions over 2 years is crucial right now. So
Absolutely.
I'm glad you brought that up too. Something conversation we have frequently as well.
That's right.
Let's shift gears for a minute and talk about environmental regulations. We don't have to go too deep on this, but have you seen any big changes? Are conditions in the Northeast getting more stringent, less stringent, kind of staying the same? How are regulations changing, and how is that affecting development?
Great question. And I can spend a long time on a lot of this, but I'll give some of the highlights. I would say in general, regulations are not getting any easier, nor are they getting any pro developer. I would say the majority of them, particularly in the Northeast, are becoming more challenging. Now, it's not that the hurdle can't be handled. It just means that maybe there's a little bit more construction cost and timing for the permits. For example, in 2021, New Jersey added a 4th prong of stormwater management called green infrastructure, promote this green movement that we've all been a part of and listening to on the media. And then not only 2 years later, in July of 2023, they further amended the stormwater management regulations to protect flood hazard areas, as well as increase some of the runoff rates that we deal with. So the environmental regulation climate is certainly changing and very, very quickly evolving. Also, a couple of years ago, New Jersey, just staying on Jersey specific now, because we battle with California trying to be the first comers with new regulations. They have added since EV parking as a statute, meaning that every new project requires some EV charging stations on site. And for much larger buildings, 100,000 square feet or more, they want your roof to be ready for solar. They're not telling you need to have solar in there, but it needs to be able to accommodate it should and when new regulations change that it is required, or maybe the owner wants to do it themselves. And then I would say all of our surrounding states next to Jersey are kind of starting to copy and follow suit. Their stormwater regs are getting more stringent and more focused. Pennsylvania and New York have old BMPs, but they are turning around shortly. So I would say overall it is becoming more challenging, but nothing that is going to stop development, Karly. It just will certainly make it a little bit more expensive, and it will add another layer of timing. But yes, environmental regulations are certainly changing. Now, on the flip side, Karly, the one win I will say that developers have had was the Sackett case that came out in the summertime, where the EPA started talking about how wetlands should not be as regulated as they currently are today. So the Army Corps of Engineers is redoing their regulations, basically saying that as long as wetlands are not connected to navigable waterways, they can be less regulated, and maybe gives us the opportunity, Karly, when looking at a site plan to cut through a wetland, maybe fill a portion of it to, site plans are rectangles. So we're always trying to take a rectangle and put it in a uniquely shaped property. That was one of the pros for, I would say, the development and real estate community, that the Supreme Court kind of took a look at a case law and said, we think this is overstretching. Let's bring it back to the underlying regulation. So some wins and some losses, but overall a continually moving target for environmental regulations.
And that's such an important takeaway, because you have a site, you think you can build XYZ, you decide to hold on to it a few years later. It's really important to revisit all of this new policy, because the developable square footage might be greater, might be less, but it's always changing. And I think a lot of people say, 4 or 5 years ago, I looked at this, I can build XYZ, and that may not be the case. But it sounds like maybe it could be better. There's a small sliver of projects that potentially get more profitable, I guess, over time. So
that's right.
Good to stay on top of all of that. Any other misconceptions or things about development or the engineering business in general that you find pop up a lot in your conversations?
Certainly. I would say timing is the biggest misconception in my field. It's some other professional or consultant who may be really great at, say, transactional contracts, or maybe really great at identifying certain properties or advising that developer that we can get approvals, quickly. And I would say that the biggest misconception is it just takes time. Unfortunately, the entitlement business does not move quickly. The right, consultants and team on board will certainly expedite it to a certain extent. We can shave maybe some weeks or months off, but no one can take a 2-year project and make it 3 months, Karly. So I would say the biggest misconception is truly understanding the time it takes, as you mentioned earlier, to go from conceptual design all the way through to the point where you're doing shovel in the ground. And Karly, as you know, before someone even really calls me, there's upfront negotiations about price and timing, and that takes time as well. So you're doing the upfront broker work of timing and price, and then you bring in the design professionals. They're going to work through the permit process. And then the architect on the back end gets involved with the building department, and then we can hire a contractor and go break ground. So I would say the biggest misconception in my field is just truly understanding that almost every project, whether it's a 1,800 square foot Starbucks up to an 80,000 square foot floor and decor, is going to take about a year, no matter how we try to slice this thing.
Very, very important reminder, and definitely something we have to keep putting forth in front of clients, because time is the biggest factor, like we were saying right now, in all these projects. We have to end on a positive note. So tell me something that you are bullish on for 2024. What are you most excited about for the next year?
Certainly. One, which we didn't mention a little bit earlier, I'll call them retail services. And that's where I put the car wash category into.
Mm-hmm.
There has been this explosion and growth of the car wash model, the express tubes, the separate vacuum stations. I can't tell you, Karly, how many different variable clients that we have. And sometimes they're not, corporate huge conglomerates that are nation based. A lot of times they're regionally based that are looking to do 10, 20 stores in a certain market and territory. And Dynamic has been very busy with them. So it's nice to see, because the fact is, Karly, they do want to be near shopping centers. They want to be next to other retail users. And although their site plan is a little unique, it looks like a drive-through next to a rectangular box, just like our other QSR. So I'm bullish on car wash just based off of the amount of product and contracts we have in place right now. QSRs, quick service restaurants, fast food with drive-through, still very bullish on them. Almost every major brand you can name, Popeyes, McDonald's, Wendy's, the Taco Bell, the Dunkins, they are certainly very busy right now. And one of the cool things I would say from even Dunkin', for example, they have this new mobile ordering lane that basically, if you have the app and you want to order a coffee, but you want to make sure that it's hot by the time you get there, it links with your geocoding of your app so that when you're 90 seconds out from that location, they will start making that. Then you can skip the drive-through lane, go into the separate lane, and it'll be waiting for you. So I would say overall, I'm bullish on the niche area of the retail services like car wash, some of the QSRs and how they're revamping a lot of their drive-through configurations like Dunkin' and even Chipotle. And the third prong I would say that I'm bullish on is really the Tractors of the world and the grocery stores of the world. They are still very aggressive in their expansion. And because they're about 20,000 square feet, they can fit on a various and different wide area of sites. They're also willing to split some of maybe those older former boxes like the Kmarts of the world, and maybe some closed and shuttered big box stores.
I love talking single tenant net lease retail. Favorite part of the business for sure. So thank you for highlighting some of the deals and opportunities that we're excited about as well. Glad to see you're busy with those concepts because investors love them. And it's a fantastic part of the market. So it's going to be a good 2024. And I appreciate you bringing up all of those expanding tenants. It's great news.
Absolutely. Happy to speak with you today, Karly.
Thank you, Josh. Yes, this was fantastic information on development. We really all appreciate your time and your insights. So happy you could join us today. And to everyone listening, that was Secret Sauce. We're so happy you tuned in, and we will see you again very soon. Have a great day, everyone.